So you may be asking yourself now, how should I use it? Well, let me clarify that for you. Because null being one of those contentious things, it is quite difficult to pick and choose when to use it. And so I want to give you 3 guidelines, solid principles that can help you make a decision. Now, be aware that most of the times these decisions should be talked over and decided as a team rather than the individual, because it is important that everyone knows why you are making something nullable. If that is a hard set requirement on your team, if you have guidelines in place, you can follow those. But here are some general things you can look at. Is my data optional or required? Now, what do we mean by that? Well, some data that you store may be optional, and some data may be required. Optional data could fall into the category of, well, we may know this at some point, but when they sign up, we don't. And required may be stuff like first name, last name, date of birth, email address, all of that good stuff that you need to be operational as a company. So what would fall under optional? Well, you've probably done those apps where you sign up and then it starts asking you a bunch of questions like a survey, kind of like what Apple Music would do. And it starts asking you your music preferences. Well, here you can see that the required information was your username, your password, your first name, last name, billing address, all of that good stuff to create an Apple account. And then when you go into Apple Music, well, when you signed up for Apple, you didn't automatically sign up for Apple Music, right? You signed up for your iPhone or your App Store or whatever. And that was the base information you gave them, the billing address and all that good stuff, the payment information. And so now you can look at the database and say, well, okay, they have all of that required information about me. And so what would be optional? Well, when you sign up for Apple Music, that is a product offering that they have. That is not something that is immediately tied into you having an account. It is something that they are offering you on the side. So it stands to reason that a lot of that information around your music preferences, around your listening activity, all that stuff, that is unknown to them. They don't have that information. Now, at scale, they have different operational mechanisms to catch that. They may run all of your music preferences on a separate database, for instance. But let's just go the simple route. Let's think about it in the most simple way. Well, if you looked at this as one table of user preferences for example purposes, well, you could look at optional data as being that music preference, because you don't know that up front. You don't ask that during the registration process, and you don't know it immediately. So it could theoretically be nullable. That ties into future info. Optional info is often future info. Usually when you have optional information, it is information that you are going to either get in the future or get at some point in the user process. And then you have to think about your rationale. You have to think, well, if I make this nullable, what impact is that going to have? You have to think of all of the edge cases. Now, how do you think of those? Well, what ties into that? Well, it is important that you take into account what type of product you are trying to offer and talk to the teams that are going to build those products. Communication is the vital part of an organization. You may look at data as a database, but building software is about teamwork. Teamwork makes the dream work. I can't say that enough. Get farther together than you do alone. You go fast alone, you go far together. So, always build a rationale and build a team opinion. Now, what does future data look like? Well, like I said with the Apple Music example, it may be a column that you're adding to your database. At some point, you're doing a new product offering, you have some new data that you need, and you don't quite know yet what it is or where it's coming from. Like, you had all of the customer information, suddenly you have to track their address. Well, you have 10,000 users and you have none of their addresses. Okay, so you add the column address. And now what? Well, you can make 2 choices. Here you could choose to make the field nullable, and by default it will be null. Or you can choose to put in some temporary data. You could say temporary address. What would the drawback of that be? Well, the UI would work, like all of the software would continue working because data is coming back. There's no null value coming back. But the drawback is your data now becomes cluttered. You have to keep track of, in this column we put this temporary thing, and in this column we put this temporary thing, and here we did this. That doesn't really create a solid foundation to build software on. So in this case, because this is future information, this is something we're adding, a new offering requires the address, etc., etc. Well, now you have to go take into account that you may have to catch a null value here or there in the subsequent software you're building. And you may have to make a team norm out of, hey, the address field, null, that's the value we're going with. Because when you use a temporary value, now you have more technical debt to keep track of. Now, technical debt, that is a term that is so important. Technical debt is making a decision that you later on have to clean up. Making a decision that, in essence, causes you to do rework. So, if the system gives you a null value, my personal opinion is, well, in this certain scenario, go with that null value. It'll push you way farther because you now don't have to go and clean up. Okay, software has to catch this case. Okay, you have to communicate. But you're reducing the technical debt. That is a key term that we should always keep in mind. Is what I'm doing going to cause rework later? Is what I'm doing going to harm the team later on? Decisions like that is why team norms are important. Working on software, working on databases is a team sport, not a solo race. All right, so now I hear you asking, well, Mo, I get that I shouldn't use nulls, and I get that in certain scenarios I can use nulls. But what does that mean for my queries? What does that mean for me as an individual when I'm writing the queries that are going to be consumed? Well, my core principle in software is be defensive. Be defensive. Play on the defense. Always expect the worst possible outcome. Expect things to break. So how are we going to do that with queries? Always check for nulls when necessary. When you know something is nullable, when you go and look at the table and you see null values or this or that, always check for nulls when necessary. And that is so core. You see, in my experience, it is always of the utmost importance to be on the defense. Anything you write should be safe to consume. That doesn't mean that you can't send nulls through. It means that when you're trying to do complex calculations, you should always check for nulls when possible. When you're trying to do complex queries, make sure you catch those nulls because they may just cause a bug. They may just cause something to have the outcome of null. So how do we do that? Well, one, we want to filter out the nulls. We want to filter them out. We don't want them in our result set. And we are now filter masters. Okay, there's still a lot to learn. Let's be clear. But we are solid right now. We know all about the where clause and how to filter out things. So we want to filter out those nulls. How do we do that? Well, you may be saying, okay, what if I go and I say is not equal to null? How would that work? Well, let's try it out. So over here, we have dbfiddle again, and we have a small database with about 5 students. And let's see what happens when we select the last name. Well, then we said we're going to use our where clause. So let's say where last name not equal to null. And let's see what that does. No results. Okay, so let's do that with name and last name. Still no result sets. Interesting. How could that be? Well, you can't check null to null because as we saw, when you select null equal to null, it will return you null. So how do we check true or false here? It's breaking our where clause. It's breaking our mastery of the where clause. Conceptually, it's kind of weird, right? We know that we could do like not equal to null, but as I said, anything you do with null returns you null. So how do we do this? What we're going to use is called the is operator. The is operator allows you to filter on values that are null, not null, true, or false. So it is a special keyword that is reserved for the where clause in the cases that you want to check on null and not null. And how it works is you select star from a certain table where the field is, and then you can optionally put a not, is not null, or is null. So let's try that out. We're back here in dbfiddle, and let's do name is not null. And let's see. Oh, we're suddenly getting values back. Okay, so we can see student 2, student 5, and we can see that their last name isn't null. So let's go try that with last name again, because that didn't work prior time either. So we're going to check where the last name isn't null. And now we can see different students. So there's one student that has a last name but no first name. So the is keyword is that powerful keyword. So what we have to keep in mind with the is keyword is that it allows you to filter on values that are null, not null, true, or false. It is extending our understanding of how to write filters. You can use the is for null, not null, true, or false. Okay, so the is operator can operate on true or false. How does that look? Well, you remember when I said if your field has text, you could leave empty text in there. Well, you could do something like this. Select from certain table where a field, a column, is equal to empty, and then we could say is not false. So we could invert it. We could use the not keyword like this. Remember when we said that we could say exclamation mark equals is not equal to? Well, this is another way of writing that. We could say is not false. So if we said that, we're saying where the field equals to empty is not false. That's basically is true. Confusing, right? That's basically the same as saying is true. So we're saying where the field is empty. So we could say is not false or is true. So there's a lot of different ways you can use this is operator. This is kind of a messed up way of writing it, I'll be fair, but it's to show you the nuance of the power of these keywords and how you can chain them. So you can use is not null, you can use is not false, is true. You can do a lot of different things here. So here we're saying where the field is equal to empty. I didn't need to add this to the end. I didn't. It was unnecessary, but it is possible because it's more explicit. You see what I'm saying here? There's a lot of different ways that we can chain and use things to make our queries more powerful. So what if we did it with a number? Well, if we did select star from users where age is equal to 20 is false, we're saying everyone that is not 20. Now, you remember when we did it the other way around? We could say where not age is equal to 20 or where age exclamation mark equals 20. So a lot of different ways to write a true or false where statement. And it's up to you to determine what you like more. Personally, I like with numbers the not equal sign more. It reads better. It tells me I am operating against a number. And I like to use the is keyword or other keywords when I'm operating against different types of text fields. Now I hear you asking, well, Mo, what if I want to replace the null values? What if I want to show something else when I do a query? What if I want to prettify my data that has null values? Well, let me show you how to do that.